How do you destroy a man who owns everything, including you? I used to whisper that question like a prayer, not the kind meant for angels, the kind muttered through clenched teeth, in the dark, when the world has already made its judgment and you're left sitting with nothing but silence and a decision. People always assume stories like mine start with love, or at least desperation. They're wrong. Mine began in a boardroom. 8th Avenue, floor 47, marble table, zero warmth. I wore a borrowed coat, coffee-stained boots, and the last ounce of pride I hadn't already pawned. He didn't smile when I entered. Nicholas Rains doesn't smile unless he's winning. His eyes were the color of winter steel, sharp, cold, clinical. He glanced at the contract, then at me. You're suitable. No scandals, clean background, no social media footprint worth noting. This marriage won't mean anything to me. It shouldn't mean anything to you either. I nodded. I didn't flinch. Not when he slid the non-disclosure across the table. Not when his lawyer watched like a vulture. Not when I signed my name, L. Monroe. Because I wasn't here for love. I was here for blood. 3 years ago, Nicholas crushed my father's company with a single headline. Local publisher under federal investigation for fraud. There was no investigation, no evidence, just a whisper, amplified through the empire Rains controlled. A lie designed to silence a man who refused to sell him editorial rights to our family's small, fiercely independent press. My father lost everything. His name, his health, his will to live. No one stood up to Nicholas. So I decided I would. Accepted the proposal when his legal aid found me in the remnants of my mother's hospital paperwork. Our unpaid bills stacked higher than her oxygen tanks. She was dying, and I was drowning. In exchange for becoming Mrs. Rains, all debts would be erased. Medical expenses covered. A trust fund for my mother. All I had to do was say yes. To the outside world, it would look like a fairy tale. The unknown, editor from Ohio, marrying the media mogul of Manhattan. But behind closed doors, it was a transaction, and I was both currency and weapon. The wedding came and went like a campaign commercial. No vows. No kiss. Just a flash of cameras and the smell of lilies I hadn't picked. My dress was white silk. My hands were cold. My smile, polished and false. But the beginning wasn't in that cathedral. It was that night. The night I arrived at the penthouse and was told, "Your room is upstairs. Mr. Rains doesn't like to be disturbed after 9. There was no shared bed, no champagne. Only a quiet hallway and the hollow click of my heels as I entered a suite that looked like it belonged to someone else's life. Glass, chrome, control. Even the air smelled expensive. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling, window overlooking Central Park, and whispered the same question again. How do you destroy a man who owns everything, including you? I didn't unpack right away. Instead, I pulled out a leather-bound notebook and began writing. Names, habits, faces. The ones who bowed when Nicholas entered a room. The ones who called him at midnight. The ones who feared him. And the ones who might want to see him fall. I wasn't a guest here. I was a ghost in the walls, learning the wiring. He didn't come to see me for 3 days. When he finally did, he didn't knock. He opened the door like he owned the air I breathed. He looked the same as the headlines. Tailored suit, jaw carved from stone, the kind of man whose presence rearranged the gravity in the room. "You're quiet," he said, voice flat. "That's good. I don't need distractions. I need compliance." I met his gaze, steady, unreadable, and answered calmly, "And I need access." That made him pause, just for a second. A flicker behind those eyes. Then, "Stay in your lane, Elle." He closed the door behind him, and I smiled. I wasn't the girl he married. Not really. She didn't exist. The girl he thought he owned was a blueprint I'd drawn. perfectly tailored to fit his needs. Polished, silent, obedient. But I was none of those things. That night, I turned off the lights, sat cross-legged on the cold hardwood floor, and made a promise to myself. I would not touch his empire. Not yet. That would be too obvious. Too loud. No. I'd take it the way he took everything from my father. Silently, strategically. Until all he had left was the echo of what he thought he controlled. Fine, I whispered into the dark, voice steady. I won't get close. I'll burn it from a distance. There's a silence in power. Not the peaceful kind, but the calculated, curated absence of noise. That was the first thing I noticed about Nicholas's penthouse. It didn't sound like a home. It sounded like a vault. The walls absorbed sound. The floors didn't creak. Even the appliances seemed to hum at a controlled decibel, like they'd been engineered to respect his quiet. The furniture was cold steel and muted velvet. Art that screamed money, but whispered nothing. Every object in the space looked like it had been chosen by someone who didn't intend to live with it. Just to win with it. This wasn't a home. It was a cage built by a man who needed the illusion of control more than the comfort of living. And now, I was a fixture inside it. The first 48 hours were observation. I memorized the layout, kitchen untouched, minibar curated like a museum, bookshelves arranged by spine color, not author, not genre, a detail that told me more about Nicholas Rains than any tabloid ever could. There was no clutter, no family photos, no fingerprints, only perfection, and the kind of emptiness that begged to be cracked open. At exactly 6 a.m., the system came alive. Shades lifted with a soft mechanical hum. The shower turned on automatically. Coffee brewed itself in the kitchen, though no one drank it. At 6:15, the door clicked open, and in walked a man I would later learn was Marcus Lane, his executive assistant. He didn't greet me, just walked, passed like I was part of the decor. I followed him silently, barefoot across the polished wood, stopping just before the office. I didn't step in. Not yet. But I looked. Nicholas sat behind a black oak desk the size of a dining table, bathed in morning light. His sleeves were already rolled. No tie, no smile. Just a pen in his hand and a stack of papers in front of him. He looked like a general reviewing war plans. I wondered if he ever realized he'd already invited the enemy into his camp. Breakfast was served at 7 a.m. I wasn't invited. Instead, I received a single text from a number I didn't recognize. Do not enter the main office unless escorted. No greeting, no signature. Just another wall built before I even touched a door. I smiled at the screen and deleted the message. By day 3, I had learned enough to start mapping the territory. Nicholas's schedule was predictable. Mornings in the office, middays at DI Benoit, the Rains Media Tower, evenings at private functions or strategy dinners. He returned at night between 10 guines and 11 odd p.m., never speaking, always alone, always slightly off. Not drunk, not tired, just unsettled. Like a man who didn't sleep because sleep meant silence, and silence meant memory. I began leaving. The door to my suite cracked, just enough to see when he passed. Sometimes he hesitated. Once he paused entirely, as if listening for a noise that didn't come. I held my breath in the dark, and for a moment, I swore he was going to knock. He didn't. He never did. On the 7th day, I made my first move. Walked into the library. A massive, underused room tucked behind a false wall on the 2nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with hardbacks. Many unopened, a few still wrapped in plastic. I chose a chair facing the hallway. Sat down. Waited. When Marcus walked by at 3:17 p.m., he stopped. This room isn't for guests, I didn't look up. Good thing I'm not a guest. I heard the hesitation in his breath, a pause, a calculation, then footsteps retreating without further comment. Win 1. That night, Nicholas came home earlier than usual. He entered the penthouse and went straight to the bar. No briefcase, no phone in hand. Just a sharp jaw, tight shoulders, and the quiet storm he always carried around him. I didn't speak, just stood in the hallway, watching him pour whiskey like it was a ritual. He noticed me. "You're making yourself comfortable," he said, voice like glass on marble. "Should I not?" I asked, walking slowly toward the kitchen. He raised an eyebrow. Comfort leads to curiosity, and curiosity tends to end badly in this house. I leaned against the counter, deliberately ignoring the warning. "I'm not curious," I lied. "I just hate wasting space." He stared at me for a long second, and I could feel it. The way his gaze searched for weakness, some sign of fear, a crack in the surface. But I had studied his kind before, and I had learned long ago, never blink first. He looked away. Win 2. At midnight, I returned to my room. I opened my notebook and started listing names. Marcus Lane, Eleanor Wu Patrick Klein, the security firm badge rotation, the wine Nicholas drank when he was tense, McAllen 18. The staff member he never looked at twice, details. Everything mattered. If I was going to take him down, I needed to understand not just his business, but his habits, his rhythms, his blind spots. Power didn't die from an explosion. It died from corrosion. Just before sleep, I heard footsteps again. Slower this time. He stopped in front of my door. I closed my eyes. The silence between us was thick as smoke. I imagined him standing there, unsure whether to speak or walk away. In the end, he did neither. He simply stood still, and I knew. The cage wasn't just mine anymore. He was in it too. They say women marry power, and then spend the rest of their lives trying to soften it. I married power to watch it shatter. The invitation came in the form of a black envelope, slipped beneath my door at exactly 6 p.m. No note. No explanation. Just 3 words embossed in silver. Be ready. 8. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need to ask. Nicholas never asked. He summoned. I chose a navy silk dress, conservative by Manhattan standards, sleeveless but high-necked, with a low back that suggested just enough rebellion. My hair, twisted loosely. No necklace. Let them underestimate me. When I stepped into the foyer, Nicholas was already there. Black tux, hair slightly tousled, cufflinks catching the chandelier's light like they had something to prove. His gaze swept over me, expression unreadable. You clean up well. You chose me for appearances, I said. Consider me doing my job. He didn't smile, but something flickered in his eyes, approval or annoyance, I couldn't tell. The car ride was silent, not the awkward kind, but the strategic kind. The silence between people who don't trust each other and aren't in the mood to pretend otherwise. The city rolled past our tinted windows like it didn't know we existed, or maybe it did, and simply didn't care. He checked his watch. I studied his reflection in the glass. Nicholas Raines looked unshakable, but his left hand kept twitching, subtle, rhythmic, the only tell in a man trained to have none. The dinner was held at Maison Corval, an elite rooftop club hidden above a private banking building in Midtown, the kind of place where names weren't spoken aloud, and no one dared bring a phone to the table. We were the last to arrive. The host, a man in his 60s with eyes like a hawk and posture like a blade, stood to greet us. Nicholas, he said, voice smooth as varnished wood. Always a surprise. And this must be your wife. He kissed my hand. Elle Monroe, I replied. He blinked once. Surprised I spoke. Good. I was done playing the silent bride. There were 6 others at the table, all male, all powerful, all pretending, not to be watching me with the same curiosity they reserved for new weapons. I let them. I let them ask what I did. I let them laugh too loudly at their own stories. I let them flirt without consequence. And all the while, I passed a small flash drive beneath the table to a waiter who knew exactly where it was supposed to go. It wasn't the first time I'd shared intel, but it was the first time I did it in front of Nicholas. Bold? Yes. Stupid? Probably, but I needed him to see me, not just as an accessory, but as a threat, even if he didn't know what kind yet. Over dessert, one of the men leaned forward. So, Elle, he said, swirling his brandy. What does it feel like being married to a king? I smiled, slow and deliberate. Depends on the day. Some days you get the castle, others just the dungeons. Laughter, real, uncomfortable. Even Nicholas exhaled through his nose, his version of a chuckle. He looked at me then, for longer than necessary. Careful, he murmured, so low only I could hear. Play with knives too long, and you forget they're sharp. I leaned in, met his gaze. Maybe I liked the way they cut. The car ride home was different. The silence was warmer, thicker. Like something had been set in motion neither of us wanted to stop yet. At a red light, Nicholas turned slightly toward me. You handled yourself well. Thank you. But you gave too much away. Did I? That man, Fredericks. He's not just a banker. He's also on the board of my largest competitor. Sounds like poor planning on your part, I said. His jaw clenched. Then, who taught you to play like this? I paused, met his stare. Life. When we got back to the penthouse, he walked ahead as usual, but this time he stopped at the foot of the stairs and turned. You enjoyed that, he said. What? Being watched, being underestimated, then flipping the script. I said nothing, because he wasn't wrong. I had enjoyed it. I wasn't proud of that, but I wasn't ashamed either. He stepped closer. Whatever game you're playing, his voice dropped. You'd better know the stakes. I tilted my head. And what are they, Nicholas? He didn't answer, just stared at me like he didn't know whether to kiss me or kill me. Then he walked away. That night I didn't sleep. I replayed every glance, every word, every shift in tone. He was starting to notice. Not enough to act, but enough to hesitate. And in men like Nicholas Rains, hesitation was weakness. Just before dawn, I wrote a single line in my notebook. He sees me now. Step 2. Make him question what he's seeing. There's a line between control and obsession. Nicholas didn't cross it. He built it, and then dared me to walk it blindfolded. I found the file by accident. At least, that's what I told myself. The drawer was locked, but the key was in a decanter on his desk, tucked behind a bottle of scotch that had dust on its shoulders. No one hides keys that obviously unless they want you to find them, or they've stopped caring who does. Inside, black. Folders, no labels, just weight. Documents with redacted lines, bank transfers, photos, and near the bottom, a headline I knew too well. Local publisher under federal investigation. It had been 3 years, but the font still made my stomach turn. My father's face was in the corner, grainy and gray, beneath the word fraud. He never got to clear his name. Because Nicholas made sure there was no time to. The document beside it was a communication log, a digital record, Rains Media's PR team, internal notes. Target refused acquisition. Initiate discredit strategy. Use compliance scare. Federal angle. My hands started to shake. This wasn't speculation. It wasn't theory. It was execution. Cold, strategic, personal. Nicholas Rains didn't just ruin my family. He authorized it. I didn't cry. There was no time for that. Instead, I slid the papers into my notebook and walked out of his office like nothing had changed, though everything had. I waited until dinner, waited for him to sit across from me at the massive dining table, all marble and masculinity, acting like a man who didn't have blood under his fingernails. He asked if I wanted wine. I said yes, red, dry, bitter, fitting. Halfway through the meal, I stood, walked around the table, placed the file on his plate. His fork paused midair. He stared at it, then at me. "Where did you get this?" "Your office. You should really change the decanter." A long silence. A flicker of something in his eyes. Not fear, not shame, recognition. Like he knew this moment would come, and had been waiting for it, dreading it, and daring it all at once. "My father wasn't a criminal," I said, voice low. Nicholas didn't argue. He closed the folder. Slowly. He was in my way. Just that. No apology. No remorse. Something inside me broke. "You destroyed him." "I destroyed a company," he replied coolly. He chose to wrap his identity around it. I walked away. From the table before I threw the wine glass. Too late. The shatter echoed like a gunshot across the polished walls. He didn't flinch. He simply stood calmly and walked toward me. "You knew who I was when you signed that contract. I didn't know you had his blood on your hands. Everyone in this city does." He was close now. Closer than he'd ever been. I could see the crack in his veneer. Just the faintest tremor in his jaw. The kind of fracture that doesn't show up on the surface until it's too late to stop the collapse. I whispered, "I came here to burn you down. You gave me every match I needed." He reached for the edge of the counter, knuckles white. "Then burn me. But don't pretend you're clean, Elle. You're here because you wanted revenge, but you stayed because you liked the power." I stared at him. "You think I want this? I think you want me, and it terrifies you." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. He stepped forward. I stepped back. But the wall caught me, and so did his hand, flat against the wood paneling beside my head, not touching me, but trapping me all the same. "Tell me you didn't feel it," he said, voice barely human. "That night. The car. The way you looked at me. Tell me that was part of the act." I wanted to. I wanted to say it meant nothing, that this was all part of the plan, but something inside me rebelled, because I had felt it, and I hated that more than anything else. Instead of answering, I turned my head, and that was when I saw it. His hand. Blood. A long, deep cut along the side of his palm, probably from the broken glass. Still dripping. "You're bleeding," I said, startled. He looked down, as if noticing it for the first time. Then he laughed. Short. Bitter. Ugly. "What's one more scar?" For the first time, I saw past the man, not the mogul, not the machine, but the human being underneath it all, flawed, fractured, angry, alone. He wasn't invincible. He was exhausted, and for one terrible moment, I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted to understand him. He leaned in, so close I could feel his breath. "This isn't the story you think it is, Elle." Then he walked away, leaving a trail of blood behind him. That night, I sat on my bed and stared at the folder. The proof was still there. Still damning. But my certainty, gone. I came here to bring a tyrant to his knees. Instead, I found a man already halfway there. Bleeding, yes. But not from the wounds I gave him. The hardest part about hating someone is realizing when you don't anymore. And the most dangerous part? Not knowing when that shift happened. I didn't speak to Nicholas for 2 days after the confrontation. Not a glance, not a word. We moved through the penthouse like ghosts, present but unacknowledged. He stayed in his office. I stayed in the library. We orbited each other but never collided. Until tonight. I was halfway down the stairs when I saw him. Standing by the window, sleeves rolled, glass in hand. No tie, no armor. Just Nicholas. Alone. Backlit by the city he used to control with a single word. I should have turned around. I didn't. He looked up, eyes already waiting. Done avoiding me? Done pretending you don't care? I shot back. He smirked. A tired one. The kind that barely held together. You think I don't care? He asked. His voice was low, rough, dangerous. He stepped forward. I stepped back. You burned everything, I said. So burn the rest. His tone wasn't angry. It was empty, and that terrified me more than rage ever could. I moved to walk past him, to escape to the library anywhere. But his hand caught my wrist. Not rough. Just firm. You want the truth? He asked. Only if it'll hurt. His eyes flared, and then he pulled me in. It wasn't a kiss. Not at first. It was impact. Our mouths crashed like we were arguing without words. My back hit the wall, breath stolen, hands clutching his shirt out of instinct. Maybe to push him away, maybe to pull him closer. I didn't know. His mouth was hot, furious, tasting of whiskey and fury. Mine answered with equal heat. I'd never kissed like this. Like losing air didn't matter. Like pain was permission. His hands gripped my hips, pulled me closer, until there was nothing between us but years of lies and one terrifying truth. We wanted this. When we finally broke apart, we didn't speak. He stared at me like I was a secret he hadn't meant to open. And then, like he couldn't bear to leave it unopened, he lifted me in one motion, carried me through the hallway, past the room he told me never to enter, into his bedroom. The door slammed shut. The world went quiet. And then it didn't. Clothes were shed like declarations. His jacket, my dress. Buttons popped. Fabric whispered against skin. His hands explored like he didn't have time. Like he'd been starving for years. So were mine. I traced the scar on his shoulder. Bit his jaw when he tried to speak. He gripped my thighs. Pulled me in. Pinned me beneath him like he was anchoring himself to something real. His mouth found my collarbone, then lower. My nails left half-moons on his back. Every move was a question. Every breath a dare. Tell me this means nothing, he growled, voice hoarse, forehead pressed against mine. I didn't. I couldn't. I kissed him instead. Hard. When he entered me, I wasn't afraid. I was angry, desperate, alive. We moved together like we were unraveling, punishing, pleading, clawing towards something neither of us could name. The world narrowed to sweat and breath and skin. Nothing polite, nothing rehearsed, just raw, just us. After we lay in the aftermath, tangled in sheets, breathing like survivors. No words. Only silence, but not the cold kind. Not anymore. His arm was draped across my stomach. His head tilted slightly toward mine, as if even in sleep he needed to know I was still there. I traced a scar along his ribs. It felt like a map. One I didn't mean to read. one I didn't want to stop tracing. "Why me?" I whispered. I wasn't sure if I meant the marriage or the moment. His eyes opened slowly. "Because you weren't afraid of me," he paused. "Because you looked at me like I was something worth fighting. Worth fixing." He turned toward me, hand sliding gently across my cheek. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You burn me alive, Elle. And I want more." I should have said something. Should have reminded him that I still had the evidence. Still had motive, strategy. A notebook full of names and schedules and betrayal. But in that moment, none of it felt real. Only him. Only us. Only the quiet between heartbeats that didn't feel like silence anymore. I woke up before dawn. He was still asleep. His chest rose and fell slowly, rhythm steady. Peaceful in a way I hadn't imagined possible. He looked like a man, not a monster, not a machine, just a man. And for the first time since I walked into this penthouse, I felt the weight of what I was about to do. I could still burn it down, but for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to. I always thought destruction would be louder, fire, screams, headlines, but this was a man handing me the keys to his kingdom without flinching. The morning after bled into stillness. Nicholas was gone when I woke up, sheets still warm where his body had been. No note, no coffee, just quiet, but not the cold kind. The air felt different, like something had shifted, permanently. Not broken, but unlocked. And I didn't know what to do with that. I walked through the penthouse like I was trespassing. Like if I stepped too loud, the spell would snap and we'd go back to before, to the silence, the masks, the war. But then I saw it. On the kitchen counter, an envelope. My name written in his sharp minimalist handwriting. Inside, a passcode, a name. Patrick Klein, Director of Rain's Internal Communications. Below that, 2 words. Your move. I stared at it like it might explode. Because this was access to internal files, messaging strategies. The department that built and buried reputations for a living. He wasn't just letting me in. He was handing me a sword. My chest tightened. This wasn't how power was supposed to be handed over. It was supposed to be wrestled, taken, with blood or betrayal. Not trust. Not this. I called Klein that afternoon, posed as Nicholas's liaison, scheduled a private meeting at the media tower. He didn't question it. Why would he? I was Mrs. Rains. That title still opened doors I hadn't even knocked on yet. The 47th floor was glass and chrome and nothing to hide behind. Patrick Klein was lean, polished, in his 50s, the kind of man who knew exactly how long to shake your hand and when to smile. He offered me coffee. I declined. We talked branding, messaging, strategy. He assumed I was there to observe. A curious wife trying to understand her husband's empire. He had no idea I was calculating every screen, every password typed too slowly, every document previewed behind his shoulder. I played dumb, but my fingers itched to act smart. When I left, the tower, the city felt too loud, the streets too fast. I walked 6 blocks before I even realized I was crying. Not the gasping kind, not theatrical, just quiet tears. Slipping down my cheeks like they didn't need permission anymore, because I had what I came for, and I no longer knew what to do with it. That night, Nicholas didn't ask where I'd been. He poured 2 glasses of wine, sat across from me on the balcony. No words, just wind. The city breathing beneath us. I broke first. "Why did you give me Klein?" He sipped his wine. "You were going to take it anyway." "That's not an answer." He turned to face me, eyes darker than usual. No coldness this time. Just wait. Because you deserve to know what I built, and what I destroyed to build it. You're not afraid I'll use it against you? He gave a small, broken laugh. You already are. I looked away. Because he was right. Because that file was still in my drawer. Because the flash drive I'd handed off was already in motion. Because I had pulled the pin before I ever let myself feel the blast. I didn't plan for this, I said, barely above a whisper. For what? For you. The silence between us swelled. Not angry, not empty. Just fragile. Then Nicholas leaned forward, elbows on his knees, glass cradled in his hands. When you came here, you thought I was the villain. And I was. I still am. He turned toward me. But I can't be that with you anymore. I don't know how. My heart clenched. Because I didn't want him to say that. Because I wanted to keep hating him just a little longer. Because love is a battlefield. But guilt? Guilt is quicksand. You shouldn't have let me in, I said. You already were. Later that night, I sat on the floor of my room, stared at my notebook, at the list of moves, strategies, risks, at the countdown I'd started the day I moved in. Day 1, observe. Day 2, record. Day 30, execute. I was on day 29, and I didn't know whether to flip the next page or burn the whole thing. The next morning, I got the call. The press had caught wind of an internal leak at Rain's Media. Nothing confirmed yet, but eyes were turning, whispers were growing, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the empire shook. Whether I pushed it or tried to hold it together, I had become the undoing of him, of myself, of everything. And yet, when Nicholas looked at me across the breakfast table, there was no accusation, no suspicion, only a strange, impossible softness, like he was already grieving something he still wanted to fight for. I stood, walked over to him, pressed the file, my copy of the Klein documents, into his hands. You wanted me to see what you built? I asked. I have. He stared at me. Didn't open it. Didn't ask questions. And, he finally said, I leaned down, kissed his cheek, not out of love, out of mercy. It's not what you built that scares me, it's what it cost you to build it. The problem with pulling a trigger is that sometimes you don't hear the shot until it's already hit something you didn't mean to destroy. The leak broke at 8:47 a.m., a single tweet. Rain's Media accused of falsifying public records and manipulating election coverage, developing story, 12 words, no source, no proof, just enough to set the whole thing on fire. By 10:01 a.m., news outlets were circling. By noon, senators were tweeting disclaimers. At 3:12 p.m., Nicholas was summoned for a private meeting with federal investigators. Voluntary, for now. I watched it unfold from the penthouse, eyes locked on the TV, phone buzzing every 6 seconds. I didn't answer a single call. What could I say? I started this. I just didn't think it would move this fast. Or maybe I did. Maybe a part of me wanted it to. He didn't come home that night, not by sunset, not by midnight. I waited, pacing, heart clawing against my ribs. Because whatever we'd become, it hadn't included this. He returned at 3:40 a.m. His suit was wrinkled, tie gone, eyes red, not from tears, but lack of sleep and too much silence. I stood by the railing as he stepped inside. He didn't speak. He just looked at me, like I was both the question and the answer he couldn't make peace with. Then he sat down, on the floor, back against the wall, legs stretched out, hands limp in his lap. Not the Nicholas Rains I met, not the weapon, not the ghost, just a man who had nothing left to hold on to. They're coming for everything, he said, voice rough, barely there. I didn't move. Boards split. Investors are walking. They're freezing my accounts. A pause. They even took the car. That made me blink. The car? He nodded slowly. Yeah, the one that used to outrun everything. A hollow laugh. It almost broke me. I moved toward him. Not out of pity, not out of guilt. Just because I didn't want him to fall asleep on a floor he'd built for a life that was no longer his. I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke. I knew it was you, he said, finally. Not accusing. Just quiet. From the moment I saw your father's name in your file, I knew. I swallowed. And you married me anyway? I thought I could control it. He turned to me, eyes heavy. Control you. I wanted to look away. But I didn't. Because I was tired, too. Tired of pretending the line between revenge and affection was still intact. Tired of pretending I hadn't just pulled a man apart and found something I couldn't unlove buried underneath. You should hate me, he whispered. I did. A beat. I still might. Another silence. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a flash drive. This is everything. The contracts, the shell companies, the burner servers. You could bury me completely with it. I didn't take it. Why are you giving me this? He looked away. Because I don't know who else I can trust anymore. That nearly did it. That almost made me cry. Not because of what he said, but how he said it. Like trust was currency, and he'd just handed me the last dollar he had. He didn't sleep. Neither did I. The next morning, he showered in silence, put on a navy suit with the stiffness of a man preparing for war. No tie, just breath, barely held. Before he left, he paused by the door. If I lose everything, he said, don't let me lose this too. He didn't define this. He didn't have to. That afternoon, I did the unthinkable. I booked a meeting with the one person I thought I'd never face again. Joseph Keene, editor-in-chief of the Ledger, the man who'd helped run my father's name into the ground. He looked older now, paler, like he knew time was closing in, and reputation was all he had left. When I entered his office, he smirked. Mrs. Raines, to what do I owe the scandal? I dropped the flash drive on his desk. He stared at it. Is this a threat? It's a chance. To do what? To choose which legacy you want to be part of, the one that falls or the one that makes something right. He opened the file. He read. He didn't blink. Didn't laugh. He just nodded. Slowly. And then he stood. Tell him he has 24 hours before the story goes live. When I returned to the penthouse, Nicholas was in the library. He didn't look up, just asked, Did you finish it? Not yet. Why? I hesitated. Then walked over, placed the flash drive on the table in front of him. Because I want you to survive it. He looked at me for a long time, then nodded. I don't deserve it. No, I said. But you need it. And maybe I did too. Because I hadn't just dismantled a man. I'd dismantled a version of myself, the one who thought revenge would taste like victory. Instead, it tasted like ash. Some endings don't crash. They don't blaze or scream or crumble all at once. They just stop, like a breath held too long, finally released. The empire fell quietly. Nicholas stepped down from Raines Media 2 weeks after the internal probe. No press conference, no drama. Just a signed document, a shuttered office, and a final email to his executive board that read only, You know what we did. Now decide who you'll be without me. It echoed louder than any scandal ever could. He disappeared after that. No goodbye. No explanation. Just gone. I didn't try to follow. Not, at first, because I needed time to scrape the soot from my conscience, to rebuild the person I had dismantled trying to take him down, to remember how to breathe without strategy. I moved out of the penthouse before sunrise, left the ring on the table, left the silence behind. For weeks, I didn't hear a thing, until Vermont. It was a letter, no return address, just my name on thick parchment, like an invitation to something holy or doomed. Inside 3 words, "Come if you want." And below that, a location. I almost didn't go. But one cold Tuesday, I packed my things and drove 6 hours north, through winding roads and bare woods until the signal dropped, and the silence felt more like peace than punishment. When I found the cabin, it wasn't what I expected. Small, rough around the edges, a single light glowing from inside like it wasn't trying to be found. But I stepped onto the porch anyway and knocked. He opened the door slowly, hair longer, beard coming in, gray sweater, no shoes, but his eyes, still the same, still sharp, still impossible, still waiting. He didn't smile. Neither did I. But he stepped aside. Let me in. The inside smelled like cedar and coffee. Not control. Just a man learning how to live without being feared. We sat on the floor beside the fire. No small talk. Not anymore. Finally, I said, "You disappeared. I needed to lose everything." He replied quietly, "To understand what was left." I nodded, because I had too. "What did you find?" I asked. He stared into the flames for a long time, then answered, "You." I didn't know how to respond to that, not with a quip, not with control, just truth. So I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I handed it to him, a divorce decree, unsigned. He took it, didn't open it, didn't flinch, just held it in both hands like it weighed as much as everything he'd ever lost. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "You don't owe me either," he whispered. Then he tore it in half, deliberately, softly, like he was choosing not to undo us, even after everything we'd been. He set the pieces in the fire, watched them burn. No declaration, no ring, just a decision. To stay. Later we lay on the rug, facing each other, the fire crackling between breaths. I asked, the question I'd never dared before. If I had destroyed you completely, would you still have loved me? He didn't hesitate. Yes. Because you were the only person who ever looked at me like I wasn't power. He reached for my hand, laced his fingers with mine. You didn't ruin me, Elle. You revealed me. We stayed like that for a long time. No future promises. No fairy tales. Just presence. That, I've learned, is more sacred than any vow. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, we didn't need words. There was no empire now, no war, no strategy, just two people. Wreckage behind them, fire in front of them, and a quiet beginning. I didn't come to Vermont to find love. I came to see what survived the fire, and I found him, sitting in the ashes, waiting. He ruined my family. I broke his empire. But in the end, we sat across from each other not as enemies, but as the only people who had ever really seen one another. If you were me, could you forgive a man like that? What would you have done with the matches? Some fires burn to destroy, but some only exist to show you what's left when the smoke clears. I used to think love was the reward, that it came at the end of the story, after the battles, after the pain. That love was something you earned for surviving everything else. But I was wrong. Real love doesn't wait for the perfect moment. It shows up in the middle of your mess. When you're angry, hurt, hardened, guarded. When you don't believe in yourself, much less anyone else. And somehow, it stays. I came to Nicholas full of hatred. I wanted to break him. And I did. I dismantled his empire. I pulled the pillars out from under him. I took everything he built and left it in pieces. And still, he didn't try to destroy me back. He didn't retaliate. He didn't run. Instead, he gave me the one thing I wasn't prepared for. A choice. He gave me the truth. The key. The power to ruin him for good. And I realized something I'd never considered before. Sometimes, the strongest thing a person can do is let you see them fall. I used to think forgiveness was weakness, that changing your mind meant betraying your values, that loving someone who once hurt you was foolish. But life has a way of teaching you slowly, and then all at once. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's freedom. It's choosing not to carry someone else's damage on your back anymore. It's letting go, not because they deserve peace, but because you do. I'm not sure Nicholas and I will last forever. I don't believe in fairy tales, but I do believe in moments. And I believe in that moment. In the cabin, by the fire, with nothing between us but truth. When he looked at me with nothing left to prove, and I looked back, not to win, not to hurt, but simply to stay. That was the lesson love gave me. Not everyone who enters your life wrong has to leave it that way. Sometimes the only person brave enough to face the damage you've done is the one still choosing to stand beside you. Not because it's easy, not because it's safe, but because it's real. To you, the one still reading. Have you ever stood on the edge of what's right and what your heart wants? Have you ever been asked to forgive someone who once broke the very thing you were made of? Have you ever loved someone and still wanted to walk away? I have. And maybe the bravest thing I ever did was not letting go, but staying. Staying when I could have left. Staying when the past couldn't be changed. Staying because the present was real enough to begin again. What about you? If you were me, would you have forgiven him? Would you have burned it all? Or stood in the ashes with him and started over? If this story moved you, even just a little, hit like so we know it reached the right heart. And if you're someone who believes that love, redemption, and second chances still matter, go ahead and subscribe. There are more stories waiting to find you. You won't want to miss them.